This video is a compact guide to the essentials of photography so that you can go out and take half-decent photos from the get-go. I'll be honest, you're not gonna be able to take professional shots immediately. It's gonna take some time, you're gonna have to practice and whatnot, but I'll get you on the right path. And I'll save my most important tip for the end because even though you may hate it, it's the most crucial step. But let's go. Oh, ooh, that was good. First things first, you're gonna need a camera. You can use about anything that can take a picture, so you can use a phone, a DSLR, or mirrorless, which, just so you know, the difference between a mirrorless camera and a DSLR is one has a mirror system to take pictures, and the other doesn't. It's mirrorless. But that's the simplest explanation. Phone, probably the easiest, but if you do have access to a mirrorless or DSLR, that would be preferable. Number two is going to be actually taking the photos. Now, if you're using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, keep your camera on auto. Your phone will do that automatically if you're just using the regular old camera app. Getting into manual this early on is going to be just a headache and a half, so let's keep it simple here, all right? Let's go to the next part, which is the compositional techniques. Now, composition is pretty huge. It's how you compose all the elements of an image together. So it's subject, foreground, middle ground, background, whatnot, and how you sort of position everything. So there's a couple techniques that are pretty versatile across any type of photography you're doing, portrait photography, street photography, whatever. First, rule of thirds. Essentially, it's you position the subject where you want the viewer's eye to go. So you split the image into thirds like this, and you have the subject be in one of those splits. It's why when you have a camera that you can have like grids. So it's for a rule of thirds. Every time I go to take a picture, I'm thinking, should I use the rule of thirds here? Is that appropriate? Once you get better, you'll kind of be able to break out of the bounds, but for now, you can try that out. Second big one is leading lines. Leading lines is used to almost guide the viewer's eye from one point of the image to the subject. So classic examples are like railings or a fence or something like that. And then there's also framing, which is you basically have a bunch of, I don't know, it could be anything surrounding the subject. It could be like a bunch of tree leaves or some object or whatnot that surrounds and frames the subject. And then finally, there's way more than this, but these are like the key ones, is your angle. So like where you take the picture from, where you position yourself in relation to the subject or scene you're trying to shoot. And also, while I'm taking a picture, one of the things you always want to remember is when you're taking the picture, you make sure that it's straight across, because there's the horizon line, and you make sure it's centered. It's not crooked or whatnot. Unless that's a thing, you can do that on purpose. It's called a Dutch angle. Different circumstances call for different things. Get creative. After composition, the next key element to taking a good photograph is lighting and color. So lighting's huge because if your subject isn't lit well, then especially in portrait photography, it's gonna look terrible. The best example is just if I do this. Alexa, turn off all the lights. I'm pretty much just a disgusting silhouette. It's trying to like autocorrect. Don't worry about that. It's super dark. Subject's poorly lit. Lighting's huge. You can create sort of accent lighting. So this is like really harsh lighting on one side. Alexa, turn on bulb 4. So you can have lighting almost coming from different angles around a person to sort of highlight different parts. So I have like a little bit of light coming from back here and then also right here. And then it's kind of darker here and it just creates more depth and whatnot. So you can get creative with lighting as well. Lighting's huge. You always just want to test and try new things. And then color. The viewer's eye is the key part of this. So typically with color theory, the warmer the color, which is like red, orange, yellow, that's where your viewer's eye is going to go. If you think about it, if you look at a picture and there's like a subject that's red, your eye is going to move there first before it looks at the blues or whatnot. So you want to keep that in mind. And then you also want to use like complementary colors. So there's obviously the color wheel. If you don't know, you might want to just take a look at it. Art color theory, classic. No matter what form of art you're doing, it's pretty much an essential, assuming there's color involved. You want to make sure it is visually appealing, whatever the viewer is looking at. Typically that's using complementary colors and whatnot. There's also black and white photography. So obviously there's no color there. So the big thing is texture and contrast. There's not a lot of grays involved. You want high contrast and texture. So whatever subject or scene you're taking a picture of, you want there to be a lot of visible texture, which contrast can kind of help with that as well. Now, at the end of the day, you have these sort of elements that go into a good photograph. The key, though, is the subject. Without a subject, it's just a bad photo. There's nothing for the viewer to like look at in the photo and their eye goes somewhere. If their eye doesn't go anywhere and they're just like, what is this? Then it's just not a good photo. I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you. But the key part to when you're in the moment taking a photograph is thinking about, where is the viewer's eye gonna be looking when I take this picture and show it to people or whatnot? Whereas you can even think about it as your eye. Where does my eye go in this scene? And it's almost like you're sending the viewer on an adventure. Optimally, you can tell a story, not only by what's in the photograph, but where you send the viewer's eye just around. Send them through a scene of, I don't even know what. You can get creative with it. Crazy. Go crazy. Now, there's a bunch of technical elements that go into taking a photograph. This is going to be a numbers game. Just going to keep it a stack with you. And this will be especially important if you're on a DSLR or mirrorless camera. Some of this stuff is good to know, though, if you're on a phone, because your phone camera works in the same way. It's just much smaller and you don't have as much flexibility. So first, there's ISO. So ISO is basically the photosensitivity of the sensor in the camera, which when light enters a camera through the lens, it hits the sensor, and then that sensor processes the light and shows it on the camera so you can see it. The ISO is how sensitive that sensor is to light. So a little bit of light, if you have a high ISO, will create a brighter image. Next thing is aperture. Now, a camera has a lens on it. Now, lenses are important because they contribute to how the photo will look in the end. There's a bunch of different elements, but there's a little hole in a lens that opens and closes. It's called the aperture. And so the lower the aperture, the wider that hole gets, so that's less blockage. So more light can come through the camera and go to that sensor. So lower aperture, it's a little counterintuitive to think about, but lower aperture means the hole is larger and more light gets through, so it's brighter. Aperture is pretty important for getting background blur in a photo, like this, behind the subject. Like right here. But I'll go into that in a different video that's focused on just cameras that are DSLRs or mirrorless. And then the last one that sort of affects how much light is in an image is shutter speed. So when you take a picture, the sensor here in the camera is exposed to light for a certain amount of time. And the shutter speed affects how much time basically light comes through the lens and hits the sensor. So the shutter speed can also affect how bright an image is, because if you have the sensor open to the light for longer, then more light is sensed. If that makes sense. Basically, more light comes through because it's taking a picture for more time. You can take a picture for up to 30 seconds and it just sits there. The best way to think of like how it affects an image would be, think of when you're like taking a picture on your phone, like a selfie, and it's dark around you and it kind of becomes like blurry from like motion blur because you're like moving around. That's because the sensor, in order for there to be enough light for it to be a picture where you can actually see yourself, the sensor has to be open to light for more time. And then also, you'll notice photos get grainy. That's because of ISO. The higher the ISO, the grainier a photo will be, just generally speaking. And so all of these elements, aperture, ISO, shutter speed, that affect how bright an image is basically, kind of combine into this idea of exposure. Now, you've probably heard maybe occasionally like, oh, that's an overexposed image where it's like super bright in certain areas. You can also have underexposed where it's way too dark and you're like, what is going on? It's incredibly dark right now. Exposure on a camera. Now, this is on both phones, and there's like an exposure meter you can use to basically alter the brightness on the camera. With a mirrorless or DSLR camera on automatic, you can set the meter to, I think it will automatically just go to 0, which is what the camera thinks the middle is. The last technical element is called white balance. It's basically if you take the color white and you make it colder or hotter, like more yellow. So either when you take a picture with an automatic white balance, it's trying to figure out what is white in the picture and trying to make the colors realistic based off of that. But just keep it on auto. Just try to get the composition, practice the lighting stuff, just get funky with it. Now here's the third thing. It's more of an optional section, so you don't really have to go into it. But when it comes to photo editors, I personally use Lightroom, but that's not free, costs money. That's not gonna be fun for a beginner. What you can do though is go in the App Store. Nah, honestly at this stage, it's easiest to just use the editor in your phone on your camera app because it's just not that important right now. I think everything else I've said thus far, especially with actually taking the photo, is far more important because to take half decent photos, that's what you need to just get the ball rolling. Now, my final sort of tip, recommendation, trick, whatever you want to call it. This is probably the most important thing if you want to become a better photographer. And I think if you asked anyone, they'd say the same thing. I'm assuming this isn't the first I wanted to learn how to take photos video you've seen. So the tip is practice. Practice is so crucial, especially since I just listed a bunch of weird composition, lighting, color theory things that you probably may or may not have heard of before. So the idea is that you practice just doing a bunch of wild, wacky things, and probably will end up looking like absolute garbage, but that's okay. One of the biggest components I think that improved my photography really, really fast was when I took a photography class at my old school, where we were all completely beginners, including our teacher who knew pretty much nothing about photography, but we all learned along the way. And we just basically every week would try like purposely working on a new sort of photographic style or composition, looking for new subjects, trying different lighting techniques, trying manual mode, doing landscape photography, trying different types of things every week. And you just practice so much photography. And we were always doing it in the same place at our school. So you had to get creative and find new things out of things you just see pretty much every day and take pictures of. The photos were so bad, but I learned so much from it. And if you can sort of do something like that, just practice a bunch of random stuff, you can find what you like taking pictures of and get pretty good. Be better than 95% of people in not much time at all. It's pretty fun. I'll keep it a stack. What's not fun is going through the photos through your storage. That's not fun. But hopefully this video helps you just a little bit. And if you have any, recommendations for another video about photos I can make, by all means, drop it down in the comment section like every other YouTuber asks you to do. Yeah, dang it. I'm no different from the average human. That's okay though. I'm human. That just got really deep. That's crazy.